My guest today is the only Substack writer to whom I personally pay to subscribe. He is an author, he is a writer, he is an editor, an acquisitions editor, I believe. He can correct me in a second if I'm wrong about that. And he is the author of a brand new book that releases today as we record, actually, Digital Liturgies. And I'm going to read the subtitle, Rediscovering Christian Wisdom in an Online Age. My guest is Samuel James. Samuel of Crossway, thank you so much for coming. Did I get your title right? Did I describe your job accurately?
Absolutely.
Okay. What are some of the books that you've acquired? I'm just curious, or helped acquire.
Yeah, so one of my more recent acquisitions that actually published the same day as Digital Liturgies was Andrew Wilson's Remaking the World. So that one was a really fun one to work with him on, and I've got an acquisition that's coming out later this year that I think is really, really good on the sacraments and Christian identity. It's called The Water and the Blood by Kevin Emmert.
Okay. I heard Gavin Ortland praising that Andrew Wilson book, and my own little book club actually is just about to read that one, so I've got a copy and I'm going through it already. I enjoyed your book very much, and I want to talk to you about the digital liturgies that you've observed in our culture and Western culture. And actually, as I was reading your book, of course, you cite directly Jamie Smith and his work on cultural liturgies. And his main example that really stuck with me over the years was the liturgy of the mall. The mall is shaped in such a way, and its advertising and its music is set up in such a way as to shape you into a better shopper, a better consumer. But you have added to my mental stock another strong example. I felt like that was really his one big strong example. You've got another cultural liturgy that you describe as a digital liturgy, or really digital liturgies plural. Can you explain to us what digital liturgies are?
So the term liturgies, as I'm using it, kind of refers to a heart-shaping practice. So if we think about the church, we think about what we usually mean by church liturgy. Well, it's usually the order of worship, right? The set of things that we do in order to kind of hear the truth of the gospel and have it driven down deep into our hearts. So whether it's a call to worship, a prayer of confession, the preaching of the word, the taking of the sacraments, these are all practices that are designed not simply to be rote. So it's not like somebody is standing at the door of the church just telling you the gospel's real, the gospel's real, the gospel's real, you can go home now. But there's actually an entire set of practices that make the truth of the gospel more plausible to every part of who we are, to our hearts, to our eyes. And so that is kind of the way I'm using the word liturgy. And when we think about the internet as kind of this immersive habitat, the average American, probably the average Westerner, now can spend the vast majority of their time, if they wanted to, online. We can go to college online. We can order food online. We can kind of mediate our relationships online. It's actually pretty incredible, like how much of life now can fit in the size of our pocket. And so when we talk about being immersed in that kind of environment, the book really seeks to interrogate, well, what are those heart-shaping practices? What are the order of worship, so to speak, of this kind of digital habitat? What are the attitudes? What are the habits? What are the feelings that are really shaping us as we are relating to each other online? And the power of the internet to do this was really reinforced in reading Nicholas Carr's book, The Shallows, What the Internet is Doing to Our Brains, because it was in that book that I discovered really for the first time that the internet in its very form actually is a mind-shaping technology. He calls them intellectual technologies as opposed to like a screwdriver or a hammer. An intellectual technology is one that kind of directly affects how we speak and how we think. And so that technology has the power to make us certain kinds of thinkers and make us certain kinds of feelers. So just kind of applying the idea of ideas and feelings being really impressed upon us in a certain habitat. Well, if that's a liturgical habitat, and by that standard, I think we could call the social internet a liturgical habitat.
Yeah, you wrote something that I highlighted in the electronic edition, ironically enough, that I was reading. The nature of online presence itself powerfully reinforces the sense that we are not our bodies. this is one of the effects of the shaping of being on the internet. You said it shapes us to think that we have total control over our identity and our story, and that any threat to this feeling can and ought to be deleted so that we don't have to put up with it. I actually wonder, as a Christian thinker, and you certainly are that, what are some of the Bible passages or themes that come to your mind when you're wanting to respond to that cultural liturgy, the digital one, in a Christian way?
It's such a good question, such an important one. So I think we have to go all the way back to Genesis in order to really understand what human beings are created for. And I think it's so kind of elemental that we miss it if we don't think about it carefully. But God creates the world. He creates Adam and Eve, and he puts Adam in this particular place that God has already created. That in itself means that there is a objective physical reality into which Adam has been placed. He must receive the reality of the garden not as something that is created by his mind, not as something that exists because of his will, but because of something that was given to him by his creator. So that is kind of a theological foundation for the idea of givenness. When it says in the beginning God, right, there's nothing before that. There's nothing that says, here's what makes up God, or here's why God exists. It just says in the beginning God. We can do nothing else other than receive that reality. That is the nature of givenness. So that's where I think we would start in kind of understanding what is a human person in relation to the physical objective world. Well, we're created to fill that real objective world, and it's not dependent upon our particular mental state. It's not something that we should have the power to kind of change reality radically at any point we want to. We have to realize that we are created persons. We're embodied creatures who inherit this kind of reality that God makes for us. And that's a big theme of the wisdom literature, which is the world works a certain way. In order to be wise, you have to go along the grain of reality rather than against the grain. And there are other passages as well. There's 1 Corinthians 4, what do you have that you have not received? Psalm 144, man is like a breath. Isaiah 43:7, the sons who I created for my glory. The idea of being downstream of something, not upstream from reality. Reality is not something that we construct in our heads. It's something that we must receive and submit to as created persons. And so if we kind of accept the givenness of reality, and I'm indebted to Marilyn Robinson for kind of normalizing that term, the idea of givenness.
The givenness
which I think
of things is her collection of essays.
The givenness
right?
of things, yes. And it's such a theological, it's such a theologically significant term, I believe, especially in an ecosystem where increasingly but very much of our lives is mediated through technologies over which we have an enormous amount of creative power. We have the power to curate our friendships. We have the power to control what people know about us. We have the power to direct our attention in ways that are just simply revolutionary to the last 20 years. So the idea that human persons, using Anthony Hokuma's taxonomy, created persons. We're creatures. We're not gods, but we're not animals. We're persons. So living inside, how do we live inside of that reality, I think is a major heartbeat of the book.
Yeah, I think Anthony Hokuma also calls us psychosomatic unities. There's this body-soul unity that the Bible describes, and the severing of that by the internet, in essence, and sort of giving us this separate identity apart from our bodies can be dangerous. It's very interesting to me that you'd bring up Marilyn Robinson. She is somebody I've really enjoyed reading. Just checking your footnotes really in your book suggests to me that you and I have a ton of parallels. We've read our Jamie Smith, and we've read our Neil Postman, and we keep quoting Marshall McLuhan. The medium is the message. I've been paying attention to that sort of thing for a long time. So I was interested to see, how does somebody who's apparently similar to my age, similar background, conservative evangelicalism, and living very much online, how would you actually practically live differently based on these media ecological themes that you've been picking up? And let me just make that a little more specific in the question. I myself, for, 15 years, because I guess I read, Is Google Making Us Stupid by Nicholas Carr in The Atlantic right when it came out back in 2008. Mm-hmm. And I sort of have been using that as a grid through which to view my activities online. And yet I'm still online. I'm on the internet a lot. So I actually want to start this portion of our discussion here with the very practical question. What practical differences have your studies in the field of media ecology, the effect of this overall epistemological environment called the social internet? What have you done differently in your practice because of this study?
I think there's a kind of I'm not going to rephrase the question, but to kind of conceptualize it maybe slightly differently. I think a lot of the Christian life, biblically speaking, has to do with how we think more immediately than the specific action steps that we take. So we think of Romans 6, reckon yourself dead to sin and alive to God. 2 Corinthians 10, taking every thought captive to the mind of Christ. So those are not commands to do specific concrete actions. He's not saying reckon yourself dead to sin by going to church 3 weeks out of 4. He's not saying take every thought captive by reading 10 Christian books for every one secular book. In the absence of those concrete actions, what instead we have is a new way to think about life, a new way to think about the Christian life. And that new way of thinking, I believe, is tethered to the work of the Spirit and using the Word. And when we internalize that, the actions will come forth from a place of wisdom about our particular circumstances. So I belabor this point for a couple of reasons. One, when I talk about this topic, I think people are surprised after they read the book to find not that many action steps that they can take. And that's kind of what they want. They want, just give me 5 steps, give me 5 kind of practical things I can do, and then I can know that I'm being wise online if I do those 5 things. Well, I really don't think the New Testament is written like that. It doesn't really have the kind of checklist ethos that we often desire. Instead, it's about seeing ourselves and seeing each other from a Christian perspective, from a Godward perspective, and then that perspective changes the questions that we ask. Rather than how far is too far? Can I get away with this? It becomes, well, not all things are lawful for me, but not all things
right.
are helpful. And so there's a contextualization that happens there too. And one of the reasons that the book, I think, is pretty thin on actual action steps is that people's lives look very different. So, for example, for someone who went to school and has a career in social media marketing, pastorally, I don't think anyone should just glibly tell that person, you have to find another career, because social media really affects how you think of truth. Now, that could be true of someone. There could be somebody for whom their career online is actually pushing them so deeply into non-Christian ways of thinking and feeling and doing that they need to be able to pluck out their eye, right, in order to please Christ. But that's not everyone. That's probably not even most people. Instead, what we have 5 digital liturgies in the book, and we all kind of come closer to one or the others. So for some people, it's going to be an issue of fighting lust. For other people, it's going to be fighting boredom and kind of the sense of inertia in their life just from doom scrolling, right? It's going to resonate different ways. And so to actually give an answer to your question, one practical thing that I've done is I've been married for about 8 years now, and I have really kind of brought my wife into my online life in a very practical way, to where I don't even have my own Twitter password. She knows my password, I don't. So if I want to log on to Twitter, I have to go ask for it, and she'll log me in. And one of the things that does is it creates this transparency between me and her in terms of not just like what I'm looking at online, though that could be one dimension of it, but also how much time am I spending? Because she actually has kind of this internal sense of like, yeah, he's asked me like 3 times today for his password. Like, are you okay? Like, are you arguing with somebody? Are you getting into something that, you really are wasting time with? And so that kind of transparency, I think, is a big resistance to the digital liturgies. All 5 of the digital liturgies thrive on secrecy and privacy.
Right.
They all thrive on that. So I think if nothing else, I think exploding the idea that I have a right to kind of just coexist in an isolationist way with me and my online habits, I think exploding that myth is going to be a path to real practical change for a lot of people.
I love that reframing of the question, and I love your answer. I think that it was actually helpful for me to come to the end of, actually, just let me admit, yet another evangelical book trying to help me live wisely, where you didn't give practical steps that I knew were impracticable for me. I do live online, and I think my job is my calling, and I write and edit for a blog. I can't just log off, and I couldn't be asking my wife for my password all the time for that particular thing. That part I have to be online all the time. But I do try to bring the kinds of basic elemental Christian truths into my online life in just the way you describe. As you were writing, I was thinking about the many, many comments I get. I'm sure you when you write articles or give interviews on YouTube, such as this will be, you'll end up getting comments, and sometimes you interact, sometimes you don't. I do have the definite sense that it's as you described, that some of these folks would love to see me in person, would actually treat me with great courtesy, but yet online they're questioning my salvation because we have this tertiary disagreement. Right. And one thing that I try to shape myself with is the remembrance there is a flesh and blood image bearer of God on the other end of this wire, wherever it goes in the world, even if they're anonymous. And I'm going to have to treat them the way I would like to be treated, because they're made in God's image, and I have to respect that. So that's a really helpful answer. And I challenged you a bit. That could be an awkward question. What do you actually do? How do you practice what you preach? And I just wanted some wisdom. Let me turn to another piece of wisdom that I saw in the book where I resonated with this. It was the story of these made up but not made up characters of Dean and Erica. Dean was more of the leftist evangelical, and Erica was the right-wing evangelical. And it does seem to me to be incontrovertible that the internet in general and social media in particular have brought out of Dean and Erica something that isn't good for them and something that isn't good for the church. Can you talk to us about that illustration that you used?
Yeah, so in the book, I kind of used composite characters, Dean and Erica, and my experience of both of those characters is very similar, even though Dean and Erica are coming at things from basically 180 completely opposite perspectives. But it's an experience that's more and more common of, I know this person in real life, I've got some kind of relationship with them, and yet they seem to be slipping away somehow. I've just kind of noticed these changes in how they think and how they interact. And a lot of the time, it's nothing discernible that you can pinpoint going on in their kind of like their marriage or their spiritual life. Instead, it seems to be that they are kind of taking on the characteristics of certain social media pundits, or the way they talk about things kind of has this more kind of like extremist pull. And I hope and I think that Dean and Erica don't come off as aliens in the book. Instead, they're extremely relatable.
Exactly.
It's we can see ourselves in these characters. It's not that it's, oh, look at those strange people over there, look how messed up they are. It's look at how ordinary people can all of a sudden find themselves feeling and reacting to things in a way that they just did not anticipate. And what they've done is we've internalized a set of values that flies under the radar, and we can be patting ourselves on the back because we're not going to any unsavory websites, or we're not telling lies on the internet. But if we're kind of drawn, and our hearts are kind of bent toward the punchiest put downs that we see
Yes.
kind of from heroes of our tribe, or if we really appreciate the people who are able to kind of just like shut down a conversation with this authoritative kind of crushing of people, and we kind of valorize that, and we are drawn to that, then eventually we're going to become that. We're giving our attention to those types of things, and what we give our attention to has a heart-shaping effect on us. And so I don't think of Dean and Erica as far off examples. I think of them, and I mentioned this in the book, like this, I've seen these effects in my own life. And Mark, particularly in the last few years, I've spoken to just a lot of pastors and a lot of church leaders who say, I'm getting pressures and angers and hostilities from certain people in my church that I've never anticipated before. I had no idea that this was brewing, and these people are not super relationally open. It's not like they're coming to me privately and expressing concerns. It's nothing, and then one day explosion.
Wow.
And in almost all of these cases, you can go back and kind of look at their Facebook posts, or you can look at their Twitter posts, and you can see the gears working. You can see the YouTube subscriptions kind of anticipating where this relationship was going to go. So I think it's pastorally just very relevant. It's relationally relevant. We're all kind of dealing with some example of this in some form in our lives.
Yeah, Marilyn Robinson has an essay, I don't remember in which book, in which she talks about the radicalization of her mother, in this case not through the internet, but through television. And I won't say which direction she went, but I'll never forget that image of this, your pretty standard little old lady who likes to bake cookies for her grandchildren and doesn't live a life of great agitation. She lives a life of peace because she's toward the end of her life and has lived a happy life. And yet, what does she want to discuss now that she's gotten into really digital liturgies with her friends? And when they go to the coffee shop, they want to talk politics, and they're all agitated all the time. And I never will forget a little old lady at my church who brought cookies to the evangelistic ministries and never expressed a contrarian political opinion to me personally. And then I go online, and she's posting an obviously faked, it was actually a church sign generator. I could tell. I'd seen this website, but they replaced the church logo with Islamic mosque logo, and it said, "We are here to kill you, all Americans." And I thought, my goodness, like, how did you not see that this just isn't true? And I suddenly realized this is a pastoral problem. We've got to do something. And one thing I would suggest that pastors do is pick up the book Digital Liturgies. It's got some real wisdom for you and can help you categorize the various ways in which people are shaped in the Christian church. Another great paragraph in the book that I just found so insightful, you talked about the value of civility and the whole idea that it could actually be an argument that we would have. Should we be civil to one another? I mean, it kind of blows my mind still that we're doing this, and you nailed exactly why it happens. It's because the internet and its shaping power gives us a kind of permission to be uncivil to others simply because they're physically distant. We feel as if they're not persons over there. We treat them like they're not. Somehow that just ends up happening in this, liturgical space, as it were. And you said we wouldn't be having this conversation but for the internet, because who in the world debates the value of civility when it comes to real-life interactions with people? Mm-hmm. Once again, I'll ask you, what biblical themes, what Bible passages, Logos Bible software exists to help people study the Bible. Where would you point people toward Christian biblical themes to counter the liturgical shaping power of these digital liturgies when it comes to civility?
Yeah, so 1 Thessalonians 4:11 is a big one, where Paul is encouraging Christians to literally live quietly, working with our own hands, minding our own business. That is a problematic passage for a would-be social media warrior, I think, because that is really an exhortation and a warning against going around looking for a fight. And so much of, I think, the dysfunctional social media behavior that we see among Christians is not living quietly, is not minding our own business, not esteeming to handle things well and maturely. At Romans 12, as far as it is in our power to live peaceably with all people, the virtue of living peaceably, like that is actually commanded in Scripture. And yet when you talk about that online, you get called all kinds of names, some of which I can't even say on this podcast, by Christians. I mean, it's extraordinary, the level of just kind of one-sidedness to this whole conversation. But honestly, Mark, I think the big story here is that we have developed a callous to the biblical warnings against anger. And there are so many biblical warnings against anger. I'm just going to list off a couple. Of course, everyone knows the anger of man does not achieve the righteousness that God requires. James, Proverbs 14, whoever is slow to anger has great understanding. Those are clear biblical passages. And everyone wants to talk about, Jesus showed righteous anger when he cleared the temple. Yes. But the overwhelming emphasis on Scripture is not on the opportunity of anger, but the danger of anger. That's the overwhelming biblical emphasis. And I think what we're seeing right now in some sectors of the church is a skepticism toward winsomeness and toward civility that really is the flip side of the baptizing of anger. We are trying to sanctify our kind of seething rage toward the world, toward fellow believers, toward anyone that we kind of blame for some of the revolutionary things that have been going on. And I'm not denying that there is a righteous anger. There is certainly a righteous anger. But for every righteously angry person online, there's 100, maybe 1,000 who really are adrift in being in tune with their own mental state to such a degree that they just lash out. And that's why the conversation about civility and winsomeness is so broken to me, because it's not our natural instinct to want to go over to somebody working in the cubicle next to us and bludgeon them over their head with conservative political talking points. And I'm not saying the conservative political talking points should never come up. I'm not saying we shouldn't defend what we believe proactively. We absolutely should. But we don't reach for these weapons in real life. What we do is we go online, the physicality of the human person is removed from us, and we feel so in control of our environment and so kind of in tune with our own emotional state that we just project outward. And to me, that is one of the most powerful effects of the digital liturgies, is the way it just removes the feeling of the necessity for loving each other, for being patient, for being slow to anger, for being slow to speak. I mean, goodness, like, how do you reconcile that with a lot of the social media activism that you see today? So I hope that answers your question, but that's kind of what I think about a lot when in terms of challenges that the online space is presenting the church with right now.
Another passage I think of, Galatians 5:19 and 20, the works of the flesh include not just, prominent sexual sins. I think we're all accustomed to seeing those there, but division, dissension, contention, strife. How much Christian interaction online, especially actually between Christians, among Christians, is an open violation of that passage, which is very directly warning us not to cause unnecessary division. There are divisions that have to be created over truths that the Bible teaches, and the Bible itself creates divisions. But within the Christian church, among people who love the Lord and want to follow the Bible, I love what you were saying earlier. I'm having trouble pulling back on that exact thread, but there are elements of what both Erica and Dean might be posting about where, and I know what it was. You're talking in the book about some controversial issues that have come up in the last couple of years, and both Erica and Dean are posting very abrasive versions of their viewpoint on these things, full well knowing that if they walked into church and dropped that bomb on people, it would cause an explosion, of course. Mm-hmm. They are violating that verse, Galatians 5:19, the works of the flesh. You, in your book, you draw really, to me, that like the central insight that I think I'm going to take away is the most really punchy insight is that the internet is itself porn-shaped. And that's a pretty bold thing to say, but you fill it out this way. You talk about, let me see if I can find the quote here. Yeah, porn and the web go together so efficiently precisely because they are both instruments of commodification, a way to turn the most intimate or even most elementary stuff of human life into consumable content. Makes me think of a YouTube video I just saw yesterday, actually, where a YouTuber who has 500,000 something subscribers says, hey, I kind of hate to admit it, but here are the things that get views. And he brought up conflict and conspiracy theories, along with some that weren't so bad, curiosities, not so bad. But he himself, a non-Christian, felt embarrassed to acknowledge that, yeah, actually these things do bring views. So conflict, which is a very personal thing, now becomes a commodity. I thought this was so insightful. I want you to just kind of fill out your argument there. How is the web porn shaped?
So the web represents this almost infinite technological ability to manufacture whatever we want to see, right? So whether we're talking about Google, I mean, if you can Google anything, and the odds are very good that you're going to get at least a couple hits for it, right? And particularly, this doesn't make it into the book, but with the advent of popular AI tools like ChatGPT, and then even artificial intelligence generated art and music and film, the ability to type in a prompt to say, hey, show me Mark Ward at a casino in Vegas or something like that. And it actually, it pops up a picture that an average person would not be able to tell that was an artificially generated image. So that's part of the web's character. We're not, at this point, we haven't even talked about bad pictures. We're just talking about content in general. It's in the web's nature to present the user with a near infinite ability to manufacture whatever they want. And Alan Noble, in his book, You Are Not Your Own, makes this really insightful point about pornography, which is that online pornography in particular is basically the power of a Roman emperor in the palm of everyone's hand. And what he means by that is that some of the images and situations in online pornography, if you were to rewind the tape 2,000 years ago, the only person who could actually make these fantasies come to life would be a person of almost exceptional power and wealth. It would have to be a person who could summon slaves to basically do this for him. We all have the power of Nero. Noble makes that point. We all have the power of an emperor in summoning up these wild fantasies. And so the question is, well, is porn just one more thing that's on the internet? Or is there something about pornography that fits the logic of what the internet is? And I think that's true. I think the porn and the internet are like two kind of completely compatible ways of imagining ourselves. Give me whatever I want to see right now. Well, that's the vocabulary of ChatGPT. It's also the vocabulary of pornography. And I'll mention this one quick example that I give in the book that a lot of people enjoy, just kind of hearing about this example. So one of the really popular genres of YouTube video is a reaction video. And the reaction videos can be anything. You're watching a content creator, the camera is turned on them, and they're reacting to either sports highlights, scenes from a movie, anything. And they're having like very normal human reactions. They're laughing, they're crying, they're screaming if it's something scary, What you have to understand is that by turning the camera on themselves to react and giving the audience this view of themselves reacting, what are they doing? They're simulating friendship. That's what they're doing. Because when you and I go to the movies with our friends or our family, we're not just watching the movie, are we? We're watching them watch the movie, and that adds to the enjoyment. To see your wife or see your buddy crack up at something and just like not able to stop laughing, that is infectious, and it's part of the joy of when humans get together. They take cues from each other. A reaction video is YouTube's idea of what friendship is, and it's simulated friendship. And I think that's a great example of how the logic of the internet takes a very intimate thing like friendship or sex and turns it into something that we can kind of simulate, consume, and then discard.
You make me think of Mere Christianity, and he discusses he gives this illustration of what if there was like a peep show for food. And there's this culture where they release the lid of the casserole and everybody looks. Yeah. And you feel like, well, that's pretty extreme, Lewis. But here is our culture doing that very thing with friendship. What does it say about a culture that friendship has to be commoditized like that? People often complain about the thinness of friendships on social media, and that can be a problem, although I tend to find it's just actually helping me keep some kind of connection to people. The people I'm really close to, I have other means of connecting with. But I was reading your illustration there, borrowing some from Noble, I guess, and felt, wow, that's profound, and that's why I have always felt that is just a distasteful part of the YouTube world. I've never really cared to watch those videos because I have friends. It makes me feel sorry for the lonely people who are reaching out for that. I'm not necessarily blaming them. There's something wrong in our society. We're bowling alone, as the sociologist said. Now, I am coming to this conversation from the offices of Logos in Bellingham, and I work for a Bible software company, kind of the big Bible software company. Not as big as YouVersion, but in a different way. And I care deeply about Bible software. And in the last, a little while ago, I read John Dyer's book, The People of the Screen, an Oxford title. Come to think of it, it might have been you talking with Kevin DeYoung. I'm trying to remember what podcast you were on that actually put me onto that book. I'd seen it come up, but I put it right at the center of my radar, and I got it from the library, and I read it. And I'm a little afraid the whole time because he's actually talking about a bunch of people that I know here at Logos, although it's from about 10 or 12 years ago before I came. He's telling stories I'm pretty familiar with, and he's talking about a world that is my world. And he keeps promising in the book to deliver a meaningful difference between encountering the Bible digitally, which is pretty much almost always how I encounter it nowadays, either in audio or in Logos, and those who encounter it in paper, which is, of course, what I used to do prior to getting into this world. And I probably will do again. I kind of cycle in and out of things. I personally am not ready to give all of the supporting reasons. I feel like I started a review, and it's going to be a lot of work. Not sure I'm going to follow through with it. I personally felt like the payoff there wasn't quite what I was expecting. But I'm coming to this, I hope, not as an employee of Logos first, but as a disciple of Jesus who wants to do the right thing. I don't want to be malformed, poorly shaped by the digital liturgy of Bible software. And I was wondering if you would bring it up in the book. I don't recall you bringing it up unless I possibly missed it. But I did wonder, what path might you go down if you were going to set up some kind of study or just study by reading books and articles? How would you try to answer that question for yourself? What are the effects of digital Bible study versus paper Bible study?
Yeah, I think it's an important question. And Mark, you said, I even though I work for a digital Bible software company, like I don't want to come at it primarily from that angle. And I think that's a good impulse, but you are where you are because the Lord put you there, right? This is kind of goes back to what I was talking about with givenness. Like that's part of what the Lord has done in your life. And so I don't want anyone to read digital liturgies and think God was asleep at the wheel when he made me go into this social media marketing business, or God didn't know what he was doing. That's decidedly not the kind of book I wanted to write, because I think that sells short actually what Christian wisdom is. Christian wisdom in many cases is not completely blowing your life up. It's thinking about everyday life from a Godward perspective, as we've talked about before. But I think what I would say in the digital Bible versus physical Bible, I think there's always going to be a place for physical Bibles. I think that is there's so much just kind of tactile goodness in being able to hold, particularly a copy of Scripture that has stayed with you for several years, and
I
you can
agree.
you can kind of see, like, even I don't actually mark up my Bibles that much. I used to, but I don't as much anymore.
Me too.
Instead, what I can actually remember certain seasons of my life where a particular passage was very important to me, and I can kind of memorize like where that passage was
Right.
on the page.
Yeah, me too.
And when I see that passage on the printed page, I'm not just seeing the passage, I'm seeing myself, and I'm seeing my life, or I'm seeing my wife and kids back in that season, and it takes me back to that part of my life where I was calling on the Lord for grace in that particular season. So I think there is something in the more physical realm. But what I would say is that for people who find digital Bibles really useful, and they absolutely are, and some of the study aids that are available are just incredible, and just a true
Crossway
gift
has
to
a
the
really
church.
great ESV site as well,
Absolutely,
so you're in the same
yes.
boat that I'm in.
Yeah. So I have the ESV app on my phone, and I use it quite a bit. I would say that the key thing there is to remember that the Spirit uses the Word of Christ, not just the material on which it's printed. So the people of Israel, when they heard the word of the Lord, they would assemble together, and the word of the Lord would be spoken to them, right? And that was kind of the main Bible intake for most of the people, was that they would hear the word preached audibly. So we don't need to overstate the importance of a physical book. I do think that the physical book has kind of an epistemological role in helping us preserve and remember. And that John Dyer book that you mentioned, People of the Screen, he conducts an experiment as part of his research, and he kind of administers Bible comprehension tests to people who read the same portions of Scripture, but some people read it on a phone or a tablet, and some people read a physical copy. And what he saw was that the people who read the physical copy actually had a little bit better comprehension than the digital copy. And I think that's true, and that goes with what Nicholas Carr has said in his book, The Shallows, about different parts of our brain being engaged by different media. So I think that's true. But I think really the advantage of digital Bible software, and Crossway has experienced this as well, is that the word is going forth to places and contexts where it just would not have been feasible for a ministry to get that many printed Bibles, or perhaps it even can't. Countries that would restrict that from coming in as an import. The word is going forth on phones and tablets and laptops where it couldn't before, and so I praise God for that. That's nothing to lament. Again, it's just really about thinking wisely, and also about remembering that the word's power is independent upon whether it's paper or glass. The word's power is in the message that the Holy Spirit has inspired through the apostles and the prophets, and when that word is proclaimed, it goes forth and it does what God intends for it.
Yeah, that's balanced and careful. I appreciate that. I think of Ray Bradbury, who wrote Fahrenheit 451, and one time he said, people nowadays are not as creative as we were in my generation. He said, just give me a sharpened pencil and a piece of paper and I can create. And I thought, what's the equivalent for me? I feel that same sense of delight and pleasure when I'm at a keyboard. Give me a blank markdown file and some kind of topic to write on in Scripture, and there's so much that I can do. One of my questions over the years has been, okay, I've listened to Neil Postman, I've tried to listen to Marshall McLuhan, he's a lot more oracular and I can't always really follow what he's saying.
Yeah.
I've heard good interpreters, evangelical interpreters of those writers, such as yourself, such as John Dyer and From the Garden to the City, give me helpful warnings and put a shape and categories to my use of digital technologies. But I haven't stopped using them, and I think I'm still, a productive member of society and able to serve the church. So I appreciate what you said earlier, that there's got to be well, you said this in several ways. If you're called into this world, the digital world, and if you still need to have your mind shaped by Christian truths so that your thinking going into the use of these tools can be God-honoring, and hopefully you can avoid some of the negative shaping that occurs. I feel like I'm still processing this after all these years, trying to watch myself Is Google making me stupid? And I almost feel like it's too late. I don't know another way to live a life than to do a ton of it online.
Right.
But that's one of the reasons I pick up books like yours. I just think it takes an extra amount of intelligence, frankly, to be able to step outside yourself and watch yourself and not just other people. You're not just looking at Dean and Erica, you're looking at the Dean and Erica that are inside you. So Samuel, thank you so much. It really, to me, it's a special delight and honor to speak to you because I've been reading you for several years now. I strongly encourage folks to check out Samuel's Substack. I believe he also writes for TGC and I think Desiring God, and I've seen him at World Opinions. I always find his take to be insightful, but also humble and gracious toward others. He reminds me of somebody who quotes in his book, Alan Jacobs, in his book, How to Think. You model that, Samuel, and I really, really appreciate that. Digital Liturgies is available in Logos, of course, and wherever fine Crossway books are sold. Thank you so much, Samuel, for coming on Logos Live.
Thanks, Mark.